The smell of salt and decay was the first thing that hit me as I stepped onto the island of silent whispers. It wasn't a fresh, invigorating scent of the open ocean, but a dense, almost suffocating aroma, as if the very air was stagnant, imbued with something ancient and decomposing. I had come seeking refuge, a place to forget the storm that was my life on solid ground. Little did I know that the island had its own storms, far more sinister. The small village, if you could even call it that, was a cluster of old, gray shacks, corroded by sea spray and time. There was no laughter, no usual hum of a community. The few inhabitants I saw, fishermen with vacant eyes and hunched women, seemed to move in a slow trance. Their voices, when they existed, were mere whispers that the wind swallowed before I could understand them. This is what I later referred to as the island's silent whispers, for they never seemed to truly go anywhere, just hung in the air, dense and oppressive dot. My cabin was on the edge of a cliff, with an unobstructed view of the churning sea. At night, the sound of waves crashing against the rocks was a constant lament, and I swore I heard voices amidst the roar. They weren't distinct voices, but a distant, almost inaudible chorus that seemed to emanate from the dark depths of the ocean. At first, I attributed it to my tired mind, to the loneliness. But the whispers became more insistent, closer. One night, the full moon cast a silvery glow over the waters, and the tide was exceptionally low. That's when I saw it. On the rock, where the waves normally crashed with fury, there was a figure. It wasn't a fisherman, nor an animal. It was tall and slender, with a silhouette that seemed to writhe in the gloom. It appeared to be ... dancing, or perhaps dragging something into the sea. A chill ran down my spine, and it wasn't from the cold wind in the following days. Paranoia set in. The locals avoided my gaze, and the whispers of the wind in the cabin seemed to mock me. The few times I tried to ask about what was on the island, or about the place's history, I received only vacant stares and heavy silences. The sea keeps its secrets, an old fisherman once muttered, his eyes fixed on the horizon, and it's best they remain hidden. I couldn't. Curiosity, or perhaps madness, drove me. I began to walk along the deserted beaches, looking for something, anything that would explain the whispers, the aura of death that hung over the island. I found bones in the sand, not of fish or birds, but of something larger, twisted in an unnatural way. And then, on the more distant rocks, where the tide rarely reached, I saw the marks. Symbols carved into the stone, ancient and sinister, that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. They were not of human civilization. That night, the whispers were no longer silent. They invaded my mind, shrill, piercing voices that seemed to come From all directions, from the air, from the sea, from the very walls of the cabin. I covered my ears, but it was useless. The voices spoke of sacrifices, of debts paid to the abyss, of things that slept beneath the waves and demanded their tribute. They spoke of the figure on the rock, of the creature that danced, of the one that dragged ... grabbed my things and ran to the harbor. The boat that brought me seemed like a beacon of hope in the darkness, but the tide was too low to leave. Trapped, I looked at the sea, and the full moon's glow revealed hundreds of eyes staring at me from the depths. They were not fish eyes. They were large, round eyes that seemed to belong to something unimaginable, something the sea had hidden for too long. Now, I understand the silent whispers. They are not just voices. They are invitations. Invitations to the abyss, to the place where the sea hides its darkest secrets. And I am the next guest. The smell of decay grew stronger, and now I feel it coming from me. The whispers didn't stop. They intensified, transforming into a deafening clamor that echoed not in my ears, but directly in my mind. The island of silent whispers revealed its true nature. It was not just a place, but a living, hungry entity, connected to the unfathomable abyss that stretched beyond the horizon. I ran along the beach, my feet sinking into the wet, cold sand. The moon, once a silvery beacon, now looked like a gigantic eye, watching me with a chilling coldness. The figures I had seen from my cabin, the dancing silhouettes on the rock, began to materialize in my peripheral vision. They were tall and slender, with disproportionate limbs, moving with a sinister grace that defied physics. Their faces were mere blurs in the gloom, but I felt their gazes, cold and inquisitive. The harbor was deserted. The small fishing boat that brought me seemed even smaller and more fragile under the immensity of the night and the growing threat. I tried to push it, but it was stuck in the low tide mud, as if the island itself refused to let me go. The panic, once a distant wave, now completely engulfed me. The voices, once mere whispers, now formed comprehensible, yet no less terrifying. Phrases: join us, a debt to be paid, the sea calls. I looked at the ocean. The dark surface was no longer smooth. Strange undulations formed and dissipated, as if something immense was moving just below. The eyes I had glimpsed before multiplied, forming constellations of bioluminescent lights that glowed faintly in the aquatic darkness. They were not stars. They were hundreds, perhaps thousands, of eyes watching, waiting. That's when I noticed the smell. That smell of salt and decay that had greeted me on the island. It no longer came from the air, nor the beach. It came from me. My skin felt damp slimy, and when I touched my arm, I felt a cold, slippery goo. I looked at my hands in the faint moonlight. They were pale, almost translucent, and a thin layer of something that looked like seaweed was beginning to cover them. My fingers seemed longer, thinner, and my nails, once short and well-kept, were now sharp claws. The laments in the sea were no longer laments. They were voices of welcome, a chorus of guttural chants that seemed to penetrate my bones. My heart pounded erratically, not from fear, but with a strange excitement. I was transforming, becoming part of that place, of those creatures that the sea guarded. Sanity slipped away, carried by the tides of madness that the island wove around me. The figures on the rock were closer now. They didn't dance, but moved. Towards me, their movements fluid and effortless, as if floating. They extended long, thin arms with webbed fingers, offering me a silent invitation. There was nowhere left to run. The boat was stuck. The island held me, and the sea called me, and then I fell. Not a stumble, but a collapse into myself. My vision darkened, and the last thing I felt was the cold, salty water rising over my feet, dragging me into the abyss, to the place where the sea's darkest secrets would finally be revealed to me. I became one of those silent whispers, another voice in the abyssal choir. The cold, salty water enveloped me, and the last breath left my lungs. There was no pain, just a strange sensation of dissolution, as if my body was disintegrating and merging with the ocean itself. The bioluminescent lights became a sea of underwater stars, and the voices, once terrifying, were now a familiar murmur, a welcoming chorus. I was becoming part of them, but then something changed. Instead of sinking into eternal darkness, I began to rise. An invisible force pulled me to the surface, tearing through the watery veil. The smell of decay and salt was still present, but now it came from somewhere else, not from me. My hands, which moments before had seemed like webbed claws, were back to normal, pale, but unquestionably human. I emerged from the water with a choked gasp, coughing up salt water. The moon was still there, shining over the harbor. The boat, to my surprise, was partially floating, the tide rising enough to free it from the mud. I was confused, disoriented. Had it been a dream? A hallucination induced by fear? I stood up, my limbs heavy and trembling. The island was still dark. The whispers of the wind still sounded like distant voices, but the aura of absolute terror seemed to have dissipated. I walked to the boat, feeling like a ghost in my own body. I climbed aboard, and the anchor, which I had thought was stuck, came loose with a simple pull. The engine, previously recalcitrant, roared to life as I moved away from the island of silent whispers, watching its gray shacks and dark cliffs shrink in the distance. A new and chilling realization began to form. The eyes in the ocean, the dancing figures, the feeling of transformation. It all felt too real to be just a nightmare. When I felt the bracelet on my wrist, a wooden bead bracelet I'd had since childhood, a gift from my grandmother. I'd always worn it, but in all the panic and terror, I hadn't noticed it. I looked closer. One of the beads in the center of the bracelet glowed faintly with a bluish light. It wasn't a natural glow. It seemed ... magical ... and then memories. Fragments of memory began to flood my mind. Not memories of my trip to the island, but earlier, forgotten, repressed memories. I remembered stories told around campfires in my childhood, ancient legends about guardians of the waters, about those who could see through the veil between worlds, about a gift passed down through generations in my family, about my grandmother, who always seemed to know more than she let on. Her eyes, which shone with ancient wisdom. The stories she told about the sea, not of monsters, but of protectors, of secrets that had to be preserved. Suddenly, the island of silent whispers was no longer a place of terror, but a test, a threshold. I hadn't gone there to escape, but to be called. The silent whispers weren't the voices of monsters, but the call of my own legacy, the activation of a latent ability. The transformation I felt wasn't to become a creature of the abyss, but to awaken what had always been dormant within me, the capacity to interact with the aquatic realm, to see its secrets, to truly hear its whispers. Island didn't want me dead. It wanted me awake. And the bracelet, my grandmother's amulet, was the catalyst, the shield that prevented me from being completely engulfed by madness, but allowed the truth to be revealed. Now, as the island became just a speck on the horizon, I knew my journey was not one of escape, but of discovery. The sea still hid its darkest secrets, but now I had the eyes to see them and the ears to hear them. And for the first time, I felt not fear, but a strange and powerful curiosity. The island had changed me, and not for the worse. It had revealed who I truly was.